We had a long discussion earlier about the use of tax credits for private school institutions and came to a fairly divided body on that question. I bring it up again because I have a concern that I think there's a third way. I think there's a way that we can repurpose that funding in a way that satisfies our concern about folks who live in less affluent communities. In a way that's more consistent with our values of public education. I want to begin, though, if you could indulge me, Madam President, by just expressing my deep and abiding love and respect for our institution of public education in Minnesota. Like many of the members here, I'm a former school board member. I'm a public school graduate, and my 5 children attend the public schools. I agree with members who have previously expressed that public education is our collective and essential effort. And I compare it in many ways, Madam President, to our national military. To the extent that it becomes stronger and finer, it advances our democratic promise to all citizens. To the extent that it is weak or flawed, it is our urgent priority to sustain it, improve it, and strengthen it, not to provide incentives for individuals to abandon the project or pursue a different course. And now the way we pay for public education, unfortunately in Minnesota, is unequal across the state and is highly dependent on local property values and the commercial base. This amendment seeks to correct that inequity. Like many of you, I've worked hard to pass referendums, knocked door to door, and so you all know very well that across Minnesota, schools depend very much on these operating referendums. But the potential to raise operating referendums varies widely depending on the local values. In my particular community of South St. Paul, there is an aging housing stock, and there is no strong commercial base. The public schools in South St. Paul are unable to pass a referendum on their burdened citizens, and so they end up paying twice as much as nearby communities in referendum taxes. They still are able to produce incredible students out of South St. Paul High School, hockey players like Tim Paulenti and Jim Metzen. But across the street in West St. Paul, school levies are half as much because they have a super Target and they have a corporate park. Members, is that the way we decide who gets school dollars in Minnesota? How close you live to a wealthy or highly productive corporation? And members, you don't need to live in South St. Paul to sense the sting of this inequity. As you see on the handout that came to your desks, students in communities such as Prior Lake and Northland, communities such as Big Lake, Owatonna, Wilmer, Hutchinson, and Lake of the Woods all are paying more than their equitable share of referendum taxes. And it's, again, the unfortunate circumstance of not living close to a large corporation or property base. I think somebody said earlier, better than I could, it may have been Senator Chamberlain, that the quality of education should not depend on your zip code. And again, the 827 seeks to address that. This amendment would benefit school districts in all corners of the state and move towards equal opportunity for all students, no matter where they live, Madam President. Madam President, this has been a bracing day in the Senate. It was alarming to hear a diatribe against our fair city of Minneapolis, given at some length and with some passion, against our own city, our largest city and our most beautiful state. But perhaps more bracing was, Madam President, the chairman of the Minnesota Tax Committee said that we all play games. This is a game and we all play games. As close as I will get, I suppose, to a confession that this amendment was a game, and I don't play games. We had a serious policy discussion here, Minnesotans. We had 2 ways we could spend $35 million. We could try to find ways to give it in scholarship form for kids to go to private schools. That was one policy, and people with good hearts felt that that should happen. I did not. Or we could try to equalize referendums so that it didn't matter whether you lived by a wealthy corporate park or not. You would get the same amount of referendum support for your schools. Both were noble proposals, both meritorious and worthy of the debate of this Senate body. But they have been poisoned by a game, a political game, and a poison pill. We all play games, I guess I was told. We've always done it, and we always will. I guess I would encourage my fellow senators, and especially the 20 other freshmen that are with me, to join me in not playing games. and change the way we do things. Let's have a policy discussion. Let's take votes. I am not going to withdraw my amendment. I do not hold it against any member from Minneapolis if they vote no on the Klein amendment. But I came here to introduce this amendment, and I'd like to put it to a vote. So with that, I renew my motion.